Hey Threshold, Morgan and I miss you guys so much, and it's been weird not getting to be together and gather together over the past few weeks. We've been working together through the book of John as we've been leading up to Easter, looking at these big I am statements that Jesus makes. And this coming weekend I would have been sharing with you in person about his big I am statement in John chapter 15, where he says, I am the true vine. And so I'm excited to just get to spend a couple minutes with you talking about Jesus saying that, what it means, what was going on when he said it, and how it might factor into our lives during this time when we're separated and getting ready to still celebrate Easter. You know, Jesus makes this statement at a pivotal time in the book of John. He is in the midst of what we call the upper room discourse. In chapter 13, Jesus and the disciples sit down for their last meal together before Jesus will go to the cross. And we often refer to this as the Last Supper. It happens in an upper room that Jesus had some of the disciples get and prepare, and so they've gathered together and they're dining together. And by the point that we find Jesus in John chapter 15, he's actually gotten up and started moving. They are no longer eating together, but they've gotten up and they're walking to the Garden of Gethsemane, where Jesus will kind of make his final stand before he's arrested and then put on trial and crucified. And the whole upper room discourse from John 13 through 17 is Jesus getting the disciples ready for his departure. How are they going to live as Christians in a world where he isn't physically present with them? And in the midst of that, in John chapter 15, he makes this gigantic statement where he says that he is the true vine. This is a fascinating statement because very likely what's happening at this time is Jesus and the disciples are probably walking through a vineyard potentially. Jesus is looking at the scenery around him, figuring out how can I make this point hit home with them as I'm getting them ready for me to leave. And he comes up with this beautiful metaphor of himself being the true vine. Now, it's interesting that he calls himself the true vine. Because Israel, throughout its history, all through the prophets, all through the Psalms, has been referred to as God's vine. This imagery was familiar to them. It was something that they would have recognized. And so Jesus comes along and he calls himself the true vine. Now, what is a vine, right? It's a plant that produces some kind of fruit. Probably for them, it's producing grapes. Specifically. And so he's comparing himself to a grape plant. What in the world is Jesus talking about here? You know, the grape plant served a lot of purposes during this time. It served as a source of food and nutrition. I think of the spies who brought back gigantic grapes back in Numbers to show the people of Israel that entering into the promised land would lead to goodness and life for them. So it was a source of food and nutrition. It was a source of joy, right? They would take grapes and smash them and press them and make them into wine, which they would enjoy and use together to celebrate momentous occasions in life, to have at dinner parties and at weddings. There's a very famous story in the book of John in John chapter 2 where Jesus makes wine out of water. And so wine was a big part of their celebration and their communal life. What was Jesus trying to get at when he calls himself the true vine? And why does it have so much meaning when compared to Israel, which has been referred to as a vine? Jesus calls himself the true vine because unlike Israel, which almost always when they're being referred to as a vine in the Old Testament was in a not good way. They were a vine that took life for granted, that celebrated and partied when they should be mourning, that was broken, that had been given all of the wealth and richness in the world from God. and still fallen short. Jesus fulfilled the covenant with God where they could not. Jesus was everything that we couldn't be. There's something really profound about that as we enter into this season of Easter and as we think about our life from day to day right now, that Jesus is everything that we're not. He provides us the kind of life and joy and celebration that we could never get for ourselves. There's a deep beauty in him talking about himself as the true vine. He's the source of any life that we could want. The Apostle Paul later on in the New Testament will talk about in Colossians how in Jesus everything is held together. He is before all things. He is in all things. How Jesus is the source of all things. And even in John chapter 15, he's going to look at the disciples and he's going to say, "You are branches. I am the vine. I'm the source of life. I'm the one that has the nutrients and the things that you need, and you grow up out of me." And he's going to teach the disciples that the only way, the only path for them to life is to find it in him. What a beautiful lesson and reminder that is for us. That Jesus came to give us life through himself. And that any life that we have for ourselves, any joy that we might find, any celebration of life that we might have, is through and in him. He is going to tell the disciples in John 15. He's going to speak to us in extension in that moment to say that even though he's leaving, even though he's departing the earth and returning to heaven, that we can still remain in him and find life, abide in him and find life. My open prayer for each one of us is that we would find life in him as the true vine, that we would find him to be everything that we're not, that in him all things hold together. Would you be encouraged and find hope in that today?